All right, welcome everyone to today's Scotch talk at American Philanthropic. My name is Jeff Cain, and I'm a founding partner here at American Philanthropic. I have two guests with me as advertised, Devon and Matt. And Devon, raise your hands. So Devon's the guy, well, you both sort of have beards. Okay, that's Devon. Devon, Devon is Canadian, but he lives in Greenville, South Carolina, and he works for, how long have you worked for American Philanthropic, Devon?
Just a hair over 6.5 years at this point.
Okay, so 6.5 years, and Devon manages our data and databases, if you want to call it that, with a team of people who do everything from database installation to cleaning up databases, making them more workable, helping you understand your database and develop it and solve problems related to your database. So essentially that's what Devon does. Okay. Matt is a partner at American Philanthropic. And Matt, forgive me, but how long have you been with American Philanthropic?
8 years it will be in January. So
okay. 8 years.
Alive.
Yeah. Okay. So, and Matt works out of the and manages all of the Chicago staff, the Chicago folks, and they just had their Christmas party last night. So that's why Matt is looking like he's hungover and very disheveled this afternoon. So Matt's in the Chicago office, and he oversees the whole our broad data management, things like the team that does data appending, the people who do predictive modeling for your donors. We're going to talk about that. We're going to touch on all of these different areas. And I'm particularly interested in data appending, or excuse me, predictive modeling, which is essentially asking the question, looking through my database, who's the person who's most likely to give you the next gift and how much, and how can we use data to help us understand that? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So this is a Scotch talk. It's in the afternoon. Some people have their favorite libation with this. I'm on a road trip right now. So like when I get done with this, I'm going to be driving again. So I'm not drinking anything. Devon doesn't drink. So this is like doubly boring. It's data and sobriety. But Matt, being the good Catholic there in Chicago, I think has a beer going. So grab your favorite libation and get ready for just edge of your seat discussion on everything you want to know about data. So, okay. And feel free to send us your questions as we go. And we'll try to answer those along the way. I think this will be about 45 minutes to 60 minutes, and we'd love to include you in the discussion. So please offer us some questions. Now, the first thing, as many of you may already know, Devon has been, Devon, in addition to working on databases and installing and solving organizations' problems, Devon can also write. And Devon has been writing. He's just starting a series of articles on Philanthropy Daily about people's databases problems, organizations' databases problems, and it's something that's worthwhile to take a look at and read about. And in reading the most recent entry, the first entry, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to ask Devon, what is, when you've seen many organizations' databases, it's kind of a funny thing, but like you've seen into their databases, what I would say the most common misperception that organizations have about their databases? We all hear the story. They say your data is your most important asset. Data is very important, but there are a lot of, as you point out, many misperceptions that people have about their data and databases. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. How do we misunderstand this as leaders of organizations?
Yeah. I should have my article up in front of me because I probably list off a couple of them there, and those ones are probably some of the biggest ones. Honestly, though, when you put it like, hey, what's the biggest misperception? And I don't even remember if I actually wrote this in that article, so I'm going to do an addendum. But I think one of the biggest misperceptions people probably have of the database is that it doesn't change. People have this perception of the database as being like an airtight vault. Like we put data in there, or stuff gets in there, and like it's just there, and nothing's happened to it. And they don't treat it like this living organism, which it really is, because data is always going in, data is always coming out, and so they think it's just, okay, I put something in there, and it should be the exact same way when I go back to find it again. And fact is that your data over time, because you're interacting with it, because data is coming out, going in, addresses are going to change. Donations are going to, sometimes donations get deleted. Stuff happens in the database. And so I use the example that you need to think of your database like a garden, and there's weeds that are going to grow up in there. You're going to get duplicates. It just happens. Like, there's no way to avoid that, and there's no way to expect that to just not happen, right? So it's probably the biggest thing is that, like, people think the database is just, it's static. Tied with that probably is that, well, the database is just done. When is the database going to be done? I get that question all the time from clients. Well, when is our database done? And it really is this sort of fire and forget thought process of, okay, we'll put in a little bit of thought. We'll deal with the database right now, and then we can tie it up with a bow. We can shove it into a box somewhere and never touch it again. And it'll just all be solved. All of our problems will be solved. We'll never touch them again. And that mindset of, we're not interacting with our database, we're not putting people in the right roles to deal with our data and stuff. That's just a big problem. When you open up that box.
So Devon, so this notion that, and we hear that all the time, when's the database going to be finished? And this idea, and so as a result of that, what happened, if that's your view of it, like, we have this database, we invested in it, fine, it's done now, let's get on with our lives. What happens as a result of that? What problems, like, how would that manifest itself in problems if we don't see our database as a living, I hate to use that, but as a living thing, or something that's prone to error, if we don't, duplicates, all this other, if we don't see it that way and we don't plan for that, what happens to the database? What problems occur?
Well, your idea of what it is and what it actually is going to slowly over time diverge. It's like if you were to never look at your bank account for years and years, and you think, well, I pay my bills, I get an income, but we probably have about this amount of money, right? You haven't budgeted, we don't check our bank accounts. And so after years, you go back and you realize, wow, this is actually very different. And how that practically manifests out is, I thought my house file was going to be a lot bigger, or wait, my house file should be way smaller. I must have tons of duplicates now, or none of our addresses are matching people because they've moved and we haven't updated those addresses, right? Maybe the dollar amounts we're asking, we haven't interacted with our data in a long time, looked at our donors, and so maybe our ask arrays and our letters are completely off because we've just been sitting at the same $5, $10, $15 donation ask, and there's a bunch of people just sitting there and we haven't made any changes. So some of those things are the practical ways in which,
and so like I know this is a problem, and I'm Matt, this has probably happened to you a few times. When you have, like, in an organization, if you really want to cheese off your donors, don't clean up your database and have a lot of duplicates in there. And duplicates start to multiply, especially if you're doing acquisition mailings and you're running other lists, putting new lists in, and you don't weed out duplicates, and somebody gets 6 copies of your house file, or your board has changed. You the board, you have new members coming in on your board of directors and old members circulating off, that type of thing, but their files haven't been updated. So they're getting mailings that they're not supposed to get, or they're getting, you have major donors who are getting direct mail solicitations, right? So those are real problems that happen all the time, actually. So that's, definitely that's one manifestation of that. Well, okay, so we're supposed to see our database. Like, if I'm the CEO of a nonprofit. And I'm like, okay, great. Devon's convinced me that this database is a living thing. And it's not just like build it and we put it in the back room. What do we have to do? What does that mean? What is the practical thing that, like, if I don't see it that way, there's all these problems that are going to arise. And how do I prevent that? What do I need to do? What do I plan for as the CEO? Okay, I've got the database, it's been installed. Now what? What do I need to do to tend to it so I don't get all these problems?
To carry on with that analogy, if we're thinking of it like a garden, you need to have that gardener. You need to have that person in the right place in your database, and not just that singular person, your database admin or something like that. The second article, which might be out, I believe it might be, I think it is, on Philanthropy Daily, dealing with the problems of people's databases. It delves into the people side of it. What are people's roles with regards to the database, and who do you need in those roles? And so, you need somebody who's a database administrator. You need somebody who's doing data entry. You need somebody who, in your role, theoretically, Jeff, as that executive champion, who's got that vision, who's telling people what they expect out of their database, what they want going in, what sort of reports they need and lists they need and segmentation. There's got to be that from on high, that sort of, authority that is removing roadblocks and giving people the marching orders to do that. And then you need to have people actually who are doing that and make sure they've got the freedom and flexibility to do that. So I know in that subject article, we go more in depth on that, on the particular people, but you want to make sure you have the right people in the right places.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I got that. But what though, I don't like, I'm sitting here, I'm listening to this and I'm like, oh yeah, no, these are problems that we have. Like, I can't get the reports I need from the staff that's managing it. When they do get reports, they're actually difficult to get. And I start digging into the reports and I see inconsistencies in the reports. And so that makes me think, well, maybe none of the data is good. So I'm starting to intuit as the leader of this organization that, there's problems. And so what do I do? Like, where do I turn? The people at Salesforce, I've engaged with them before, but they don't really, one of the problems I've run into in the past is that they know a lot about databases, but I got a fundraising database. And is my fundraising database different than just a normal database? Are there certain things that I need to know that are different? Like, maybe I've come out of another industry where, oh yeah, we had CRMs, like no big deal. Are there things particular, like what questions do I need to ask about my database that would be unique to me as a nonprofit that may not be true for everybody? You know what I mean? So what do I need to be asking and looking for?
And Matt, I'd be curious in your thoughts on this, but initially I would say, don't look at the database itself for the answers and what you should be asking, or the questions you should be asking, or what you should be looking for. Think of your job as a fundraiser and think of what you need to do. The database is just a tool to do it. So as a fundraiser, you say, I need to manage my grants. I need to know what sort of grant proposals are out there, what sort of reports are due, what sort of renewals are coming up on my grants. Can my system do that? Do I have people in place to handle that? And do we have a process whereby which that's getting handled? Okay, so that's grants. What about major gift officers? Are our major gift officers, do they have their portfolios of donors? Is that somewhere that everybody can see it? We can put their goals in, they can see how they're matching up against their goals, activities and stuff are being tracked. So they need to think through, I think sometimes people fixate too much on the database. What is the database supposed to do for me? And you really want to sit down and pretend if you just had a pen and paper, all you had was this. You're saying, I'm going to think in analog. What do I need to do? The database is there just simply to help you do that. So I think a lot of times we kind of know what we need to be doing in regards to that. Yes, then when you do get to the technical side of it, it is really helpful to have a partner. At Amphil here, we do this all the time, who kind of help you think through translating your analog, your maybe layman's terms into how does this work in the database itself, right? And that goes down a technical, rabbit hole. I don't know if we need to go down, but that's where it's really helpful to have a partner in that role, in that sort of consultant
Okay,
role.
okay, that's a good segue to something I want to bring Matt in on, but we're going to wait just a second, because first of all, I hope everybody's noticed, the cues in Devon's in his speaking that have identified him as a Canadian, right? And if, what is one of the words?
I probably said process somewhere along the way.
Process.
Process.
Yes. I've gotten process twice now.
So you're gonna hear it a lot. I see it a lot.
Okay, all right. Let's just make that clear. Okay, so if people have joined us late, just don't be surprised if Devon says things like process. Okay. Now, the thing I wanted to ask you about, though, and I think there's a lot of nomenclature that data people throw around that I find offensive, but it's also kind of misleading. And I wonder if sometimes data people aren't their own worst enemies for using, and you brought this up in your article. I don't think you used this terminology, but one of the things that organizations are often sold is this notion of integration, like everything needs to be integration. And you get this phrase that's really unfortunate called a single source of truth, right? And they kind of bat that around like, and I don't, like, people lose me as soon as they say that, because I don't think that they're serious people. And so what do you think about, like, tell me, you criticize a little bit this idea of integration, that everything needs to work together necessarily in your, like, an organization doesn't just need one database. Maybe it needs several databases. Okay. Can you please speak to that? And Matt, chime in if you want to say anything. Like, I've got questions for you, Matt, but we don't, like, if you got thoughts on that, chime in as well. But Devon, since you're the one to call that out, why don't you start?
Yeah, well, I actually, to a degree, and I can't generally say this in public, so I'm glad you said it first, Jeff. I tend to agree with your view of a single source of truth. It's a little bit of a sort of hand-wavy, magical sort of, we'll all just kind of go with the database. Be a single source of truth. Everything will just we'll throw everything into the gyre, and it'll magically, be useful in there and purposeful for us. So I think a lot of times, one of the people sense these problems, and they don't go through the appropriate steps to identify what's causing the problems with their data, duplicates, whatever. So they just jump to this solution, which sounds like it should solve their problems. They say, well, we're going to integrate. Let's integrate everything. And what they really mean is they mean, well, I don't want duplicates popping up, or I don't want people to do needless amounts of work, or I want the same numbers here and there. But they think the solution for that, well, let's just integrate things together. And there's a perfectly good reason to integrate different systems together. It's when you need some information from one system in a system, the information in the other system as well. Both systems do need, maybe the same piece of information. But it's not just a bomb for everything. It's not just, hey, we'll just toss these things together and then that'll make everything clear. I'll use one example, and I do want Matt's thoughts on this. But I'll use one example. This happens all the time. And I always tell people, don't let your accountants near your development database. It's very common for the accountants jump in and they say, well, we need X, Y, and Z. So you immediately start changing how you're tracking your donations, how you're categorizing them, all these things that the gift officers might need to handle donations. They bend over backwards for the accountants. And then when you actually ask the accountants, well, what do you actually need out of the system? The accountants would be more than happy to have a list of donations, and their GL codes, their accounting QuickBooks codes or whatever. Like they don't actually care if Bob and Sue need a tribute, if this was supposed to receive a premium or any of that sort of stuff. And the moment you start integrating those things, trying to remove work, you're removing two humans, you're removing a human from the equation potentially. And so that leads to, well, if one person makes a mistake, it's getting throughout the entire system now. So you're kind of removing a little bit of that check and balance. And then in other cases, that information going in is going to be put in either by an accountant. So you have to trust the accountant that they're going to know what a gift officer needs to know, what the fundraisers need to know, what's important about that gift to development. Or if you flip the script, you have to trust that your gift officers or your data entry person, gift officer, is going to know what the accountants need to know. And that's sometimes true. Sometimes that person can do both, but very often it's not. Very often when you explain it that way, then both parties realize, oh yeah, actually it's okay if we have kind of separate systems and we audit these things on a monthly basis or weekly basis whenever we want. So it's not that it doesn't work in every situation. It's just people think it's going to solve problems that really have other solutions and have other genesis.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Devon. We do all sorts of integrations in databases. Devon's probably doing a new one every week. And there are systems that make sense for that, and there are systems that don't, and reasons not to. Marketing and fundraising, as your entire email stream, integrating those things can be great. But accounting is one of those areas where there are some differences that it's actually important to preserve. And to just give a practical example, we've seen organizations that have planned gifts coming in, right? And let's say a donor tells a major gifts officer, you are in my will and you're going to receive, about $5 million of stock when I pass away. And maybe they even sign, some sort of pledge form with that, but it's not a legally binding document. And do you put that on your books as, 5 million in accounts receivable? Very bad idea, right? Very, very bad idea. We've actually seen some nonprofits make mistakes along that line, or somebody makes a multi-year pledge to you. There's going to be a way to track that for fundraising and a very different way to think of that in terms of accounting. And it's okay, and it's usually good to keep those separate. But I think too, though, Devon and Jeff, you're gesturing towards a broader theme here, which is a lot of work in data services, databases, data analytics seems to be trying to push the human element out, right? The idea is let's get rid of the humans doing this work, the humans doing the thinking, and let's make machines do the thinking because it's more efficient. And certainly machines and data help us make decisions. But I think one of the great themes of our services at American Philanthropic and how we think about these things is it's important to preserve the human intelligence and to use our human intelligence when it comes to using data, accessing data, and interpreting it correctly. Because data is not a self-interpreting thing at the end of the day. And we see this over and over in all the things we do in this category. When we do surveys of donors or surveys of nonprofits, and we crunch the numbers on an organization, for example, who we find, they're raising more dollars per hour of development time than our statistical average in our other surveys. And maybe a CEO or a development director starts patting themselves on the back. We're very efficient. And then we look at their whole budget in their donor database and we say, but would you rather be spending, would you rather be making $50 per $1 you're spending on development, or would you rather have triple your budget size and be a little bit less efficient? Wouldn't you be able to serve your mission better if that were the case? So never, we need to use machines and we need to use data in a sensible manner, using them to augment and help us think through issues, but not necessarily with always the prime directive of removing human intelligence from what's going on.
Well, and to Devon's point earlier, and I think we have a question here from Hannah that I'll get to in just a minute, but to your point earlier is that really the human element starts in thinking about how should this database be constructed? What fields do we need? What kind of reports are we going to want? What do we want to include? And who do we want to include in terms of access and all of these kinds of things? So that really starts, can you talk about that for just a second? Like whether I'm starting new with a database or I'm going back to figure out a new database, or I'm shifting to a new platform or whatever. What are the kind of questions I need to ask? Like what if you started, Devon, with an organization tomorrow and they said, Devon, build us a new we need a new database. And what kind of questions would you be asking that kind of, to Matt's point about the human element?
Yeah, I mean, I would ask them the questions of, well, what do you want to know about your donors? If you're asking me to build a database, what do you want to know about your donors? Now, when I build a database for people, I don't generally ask them these questions off the start because I know for the most part what most people want to know. about their donors. 90% of a development database is the same across every organization. There's kind of these very standard things we want to know. Obviously, we're communicating with our donors. So we need to know their names. We need to know where they live. We need to know the channels through which they want to be communicated. We need to know the preferences about how they want to be communicated. We need to know our history with them. That includes the activities we've done, the meetings we've had, the letters, the notes we've, calls we've had, that sort of stuff. But also,
yeah, so like something that might be unique to my organization is I have a club.
Mm-hmm.
The Thomas Jefferson Society or whatever, and that's probably not a good choice anymore, but whatever, like it's the Thomas Jefferson Society, and there's different categories. Is that something I could overlay into my database so that I can know who's in what giving level and this type of thing like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you need to make clear what gets somebody into a certain level of the club, and then make sure you're able to capture that information. So if it's again, their financial commitment at a certain level over a certain amount of years, you want to make sure you're storing that information and have that information available to then track. Hey, they're in our donor club. They're at this level. Here's when they're going to renew. Here's the initial date that they joined. Here's the different premiums that they've received, or pieces of material they received because of that. Just really tracking that information is again pretty basic stuff. Along with a lot of times when it comes to your donors, we kind of throw donors into some segments. The simplest segments to throw people are in as your low level donors and your major donors. You can obviously split those out, but the major donors generally have a little more of a hands-on approach, hands-on touch with your major gift officers or your executives. And so you might want to track some different pieces of information about them, specifically, where in the major donor life cycle are they? What's our goals this year for them? I might not be going through all of my donors and putting a goal ask amount for them because it's thousands of them. I'm just not going to do that. But in my major donors, I might be doing that. So you need to ask, for this donor, what sort of information do I care about tracking for them, and make sure you have those fields available.
I would just add to that, Devon. A lot of what you just mentioned covers the basics for a lot of small and mid-sized organizations. But as you look at larger organizations or organizations with more complex donor relations activity, there are a lot of other things that you start to want to be able to pull in that are interesting. So, you want to know if someone is attending events, for example, even if it was a free non-ticketed event and there's no donation connected to it. You want to know if people are opening and reading your emails. You want to know if someone's, writing in a handwritten note on the response device to you. You want to know if they're calling in to your organization, inbound versus outbound calls, those sorts of things, because those can come back and help you distinguish, let's say the bucket of highly involved volunteers who also donate at a certain level versus people who are more peripherally involved with you who donate at a similar level, to help distinguish who has a little bit more value in your database.
Yeah, and it's a mix of things, right? So you're getting the stuff that, hey, how are we interacting with them? What letters are we sending them? What calls have we made to them? How have we reached out to them? And like you say, Matt, what have they done reaching out to us? Are they browsing our website? Are they clicking on our emails? Are they engaging with our webinars and that sort of stuff? That's going to give you a much better picture of the commitment that donor and the interest that donor has in the organization.
So Hannah has a question about, and everyone, you feel free to send your questions in about, do we have a database or CRM that we recommend for nonprofits to use? And I'm afraid that the answer to that question is going to be, it depends. But Devon, since you're the guy that is asked that question all the time, what database should we choose? How do you go about answering that question?
Yeah, unfortunately, it does depend. So when it comes to databases, there's a lot of them out there to pick. There's more databases in nonprofit databases out there than there are days in the month. So there's a number of good ones. There's some that are poor, and I don't have experience with all of them by any stretch of the imagination. they basically fall into, I'd say, 3 camps, if we think of that way. And so sometimes figuring out your size, both of donors and staff and revenue, kind of helps maybe figure out, and level of complexity kind of figures out maybe what camp you need to be in. And then amongst that camp, there's a couple of options. Price comes into it, and different features and stuff. But there'd be 3 big camps of databases. At the simplest angle, there's basically the Excel spreadsheet, right? And nobody should have a database as an Excel spreadsheet, but I guarantee you somebody listening on this call has the donors in an Excel spreadsheet, and nobody will judge you for it. That's totally, I get it. I've seen lots of organizations there that happens. It's a place to put donors. It's a place to put donations. And the fact is that every database is truly just a glorified Excel spreadsheet at the end of the day. So the idea is not wrong, but we want something a little bit more general. We want something in the cloud. We want something that multiple people can access at the same time. You want some more flexibility. So on that spreadsheet sort of camp, Excel's not where you want to be, but simple options like Airtable, Smart Sheets, even Google Sheets, though I don't care for it as much. Those are very simple, very customizable, but very basic. For your very entry level sort of folks that just say, hey, we just need to get donors in there, donations in there, they could use something like that. You then go to another option, which is these purpose-built nonprofit CRMs. These are probably the largest selection out there. You've got a lot of different options out there in the market. Neon, Little Green Light, Kindful, Bloomerang, Virtuous, eTapestry. These are all purpose-built systems that they say, hey, we know what nonprofits need. We know what they need to track. We're going to give them all that stuff. We're going to tie it up in a nice big bow, and you just hand it to the organization, and they just start putting their data in there. And that works really well for organizations that need what those platforms can deliver. And it doesn't work well for organizations that need anything else. And so if you're an organization that's very vanilla, your needs are very straightforward, you don't have some random program that you need to track in some sort of oddball way, or here's an excellent example. I've worked with clients that have both incoming and outgoing donations, right? So we've worked with some groups where they're receiving donations, they're housing those donations, and they're sending those donations and making grants to other organizations. Trying to use a traditional nonprofit CRM will absolutely drive you to insanity in doing that, because it has no good way of tracking both money coming in and money coming out. It's not built for that. So when you get to some of these more specialized cases, then you have tools like Microsoft Dynamics, or what we use most of the time, Salesforce. Salesforce works great for a lot of organizations in the spectrum, but it is on this side of the spectrum that tends towards a lot of customizability, a lot of potential complexity, and it does require, a little bit more, as a higher learning ceiling. So if an organization comes to me, I basically, need to talk to them first. Like, okay, so how many are we talking about? 20 donors here? Don't build a huge Salesforce. Put it in Airtable, Smart Sheets, something like that. It's just let's be smart about this. We don't need it right there. But if you have, hey, we got a couple thousand, we're growing fast, well, then maybe some of these other mid-market solutions work really well for you. Maybe you need something that's super highly customized, or you plan to get there. Again, there's reasons why all these groups can work in a camp, but that's kind of the camps I think of as I'm thinking through that problem.
It really is the case that there's a CRM called Bloomerang, and I'm sorry to report that, but and if you use it, you have to wear a sticker on your forehead that says Bloomerang. So anyway, but it's probably a pretty good one, isn't it, Devon, for that mid-tier?
Yeah, from my experience, it's not bad, and they actually just bought out Kindful. So who's to say how that's going? I like Kindful better personally, but
Kindful. Wow. Okay, great. Kindful and Bloomerang. They were meant to be together.
Right, exactly.
So, but this all raises a question, the 2 questions, both having to do with donor privacy. And I've been around nonprofits my whole life. I've been working in nonprofits for 40 years, and I don't want to put our donors in the cloud. I want to just, can't we have a CRM where we run the server? I don't feel comfortable putting all my donor information out in the cloud, right? Is that something, do you hear that, Devon? Is that a problem? Matt, maybe you hear it. Is that an issue? If so, why is it an issue? If not, why not?
Yeah, I have experience with this, but Matt, I also want to hear what you say. But yes, I have had clients come to me with that concern. It's a totally understandable concern. it does sort of it has some misconceptions though with it. So people think, well, hey, if we keep it on our own servers, we keep it internally, or hey, we print it out all on paper or something like that, that's more secure. And look, people hear of the breaches in cloud systems like Blackbaud that happened, I believe that was last year. I think it was last year. It kind of rocked, the nonprofit database world, what little world we have to rock. And they were like, man, this is huge. Like, this is, wow, what's going to happen? But the fact is that if you're working in an environment where you use email, where your computers are hooked to the internet, there's really, and I'm not a super, tech security guy, somebody can speak to this better than me, but I know for a fact that you can get viruses, you can get, worms in your computer, programs can maliciously hack your computer, and then you plug into your local server, and then now they've got access to your local server as well. So if you're using email, if you're using the internet, if there's no air barrier between your data and what's accessing it, then it's really just not as secure as you think. So there's an impression of security because, well, it's all lives in this building right here, it never leaves, and it's just not actually the case. So
and any of your fundraising employees that on average turn over every 16 months can walk in with a flash drive and take your entire database.
They could have printed reams of paper. They could have Excel documents that have exported out, right? I mean, it really becomes it kind of becomes this very a really poor environment to try and clamp down on. It doesn't work very well.
I think it's I find it helpful when speaking with people about this issue to just think through what are those worst case scenarios and what would really happen if they were to obtain, right? You have a list of your donors, you have donation information in there. You might, you have contact information, obviously. Typically, though, for your online donations or donations where credit cards are involved, you are not directly storing that information. That's going through a payment processor, that's going through PayPal or banks in various levels that have, the best security that money can buy, and that would not be your issue, right? You would not be the source of that information being leaked. So even you take a really bad situation, like you say, Jeff, a major gifts officer walking off with all of your donor data and going to a new organization, what's really going to happen? Are all of your donors who gave to you for on average the past 3 years going to suddenly jump ship because of this major gifts officer running off with their money? Probably not. Is the release of the information on your donors in some sort of data breach scenario, you get these cryptocurrency demand letter type deals that can pop up, but really taking honest stock of what your liability actually is. And oftentimes I find it's not as apocalyptic as people who are very concerned about this tend to think. And
Matt, isn't one of the major concerns that is, and this speaks to sort of either the cloud or my own database or whatever, having my own server, is, hey, we're a nonprofit and we do sensitive work. We do our donors have a right to their privacy in terms of their giving to us, and I feel a moral obligation to uphold their privacy, because the type of work that we're an advocacy organization for X cause, right? Whatever that cause is, and my donors don't want protesters showing up at their business when somebody finds out that they're giving to my nonprofit or my C4 or whatever. Isn't that often that nature of the concern?
Well, and so go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Devon. I mean, yes, if you're working on a mission that is controversial in some regard, and you have donors concerned about that, you want to make sure your database is set up for potential extra safeguards, right? So, depending on your database, there are settings and ways for you to, for example, prevent the export of information, to restrict certain users from accessing information. and of course, to restrict outgoing communications run through that database that might go to that person. So for example, I had a client years ago who some of their donors wanted to remain very anonymous for complicated reasons, even from family members, right? So they went to do a mailing and they were getting mailings from this organization, and some family members who might not have been happy that they were part of that organization, or it raised some personal issue for them, that they learned very quickly from their donors. Yeah. We cannot send mailings that have our big logo on the front, because that is potentially upsetting to a small but meaningful subset of the people that support what we are doing. And so that is a concern. There is no foolproof 100% guaranteed way to prevent those types of things from happening. So if you take an honest look at your mission and your advocacy, if that's what you're involved with, or there's some level of controversy about what you are doing, you may want to take some additional steps to prevent the access of that information. Go ahead, Devon.
It's a perception problem, though, because people think of security as an iron box, and it's really not. Security is best as being thought of like an onion with layers, because some layers are going to break. And in the mindset behind people saying, well, it's stored locally, they're thinking of that single, like it's local, it's safe. One, that's not true. Just being in the cloud is incredibly safe. You can have multi-factor authentication, you can have IP whitelisting. There's loads of ways to make that safe, preventing exporting of data. What would kill me more to know is that an organization decided to keep something local, decided to keep something internally. Their building burns down, somebody trips over a cord in the basement, unplugs their server, and now their database is actually truly gone. If it's on the cloud, if it's stored in multiple locations in that way securely, you never have to worry about those sorts of catastrophic instances where something could truly fry and really cause a problem with a locally stored database. There are organizations that do it. You can do it well, but for most organizations, it's better to offshore that, so to speak, to a place where it's going to, you got backups, you can always access it. To lose your database, you'd start from square one. I mean, you'd have nothing left. So it's just the actual accurately viewing the risks with a rational view. It's much better to have it in the cloud.
All right, so Devon is dishing out the metaphors quickly in the similes. We're now internet security or database security is like an onion. We'll keep that in mind. There's many layered. We can peel back the layers. That's a helpful metaphor. Or in that case, it's a simile. It's like an onion. Now we have two inquiries, and one of them, let me just say, we can help, American Philanthropic can help you, Devon and his team can help you assess the security measures that you have on your database and whether or not they can inventory those and make recommendations and suggestions and things like that. So there's definitely, we can help with that. And we can also, we also help out in just managing your database. That's something that American Philanthropic does. It's a service we provide of just managing your database for you. That's one of the many things that we do at American Philanthropic and that Devon and Matt are in charge of. It's just managing your database. We have another question regarding, I knew this was going to come up, and it is related to donor privacy, and it's these sort of creepy technologies, which are like, I'm a nonprofit and I'm sending out emails now. I'm doing digital solicitations, and I want to know who opened my email first of all, and then I want to know, did they click on the link, and then I want to know further, as you go down the funnel, did they start making a donation, and where in the donation process did they stop making the donation, or did they complete the transaction? So, and now we can know these kinds of things. But the question is, how do you do that? What do I have to do to have a database that tracks these kinds of things? Will my Salesforce database do it? Will my blooming fields or whatever, Bloomerang, will Bloomerang do this for me? Or do I need a different platform that integrates with it in order to do this? How do I do those kinds of creepy things that everybody else
Yeah,
does?
that's a good question, Jeff. And I would say, so your first step is to honestly evaluate the situation you're in, the operations of your development department as a whole, and your marketing efforts to understand where your digital presence in this case really is. You know, if you have 1,000 visitors to your website a month and Google Analytics is showing you that very few are going to your donate page, then you can create the best donate page ever with the creepiest retargeting efforts and the most up-to-date, you know, social media presence. And not a whole lot is going to happen yet in fundraising, because you're not, you don't have the volume for those tricks and tips and tools that are very cool to make a huge difference for you. But if you're at that threshold, if you've got a lot of online activity, you can set up through your donate page what we call IP address retargeting and those sorts of things to say, okay, someone went to my donate page, they did not make a donation. Now you can get, you could get a mail piece following up on that. You could get those, creepy ads that follow you around your social media accounts. All those things are possible to set up, but in terms of the systems underlying those, we do work with HubSpot, for example, which is a marketing platform. It integrates well with Salesforce. If you're on Salesforce, it can integrate with other CRMs, but it is a separate marketing system to help you track those types of interactions that are going on. So, if this is not your area of expertise, but you go on a website, our website actually, for example, has this now, and there's a little chat bot that comes up like, hey, how can I help you? That is often HubSpot. There are a couple of other competing platforms as well. But again, if you're a certain level, certain budget, certain number of constituents, HubSpot or another program like it are often how you want to address that particular issue. And of course, if you're running email platforms through a MailChimp or Constant Contact or something like that, again, it goes back to the integration question: how much value is there actually in directly plugging in these things? But that all, in terms of open rates and click rates and so forth, that can be tracked. Recently, the Apple, universe has kind of cracked down on some of these things to make it harder for third parties to get at that type of data. And of course, your social media platforms make it hard to get at any sort of data like that because they just want to use the data themselves to sell you the ads, right? But yeah, typically a marketing platform like a HubSpot or something else is the way you go about really accelerating your capabilities in that manner.
Devon, did you want to add to that?
Well, I was just going to say that, here at American Philanthropic, we've got a whole direct response department that knows much more even than Matt and myself when it comes to marketing tools that are out there, capabilities, making sure you're communicating with your staff on digital platforms. I agree with Matt that I do like HubSpot. I think there's that sort of inbound marketing tool. It's sort of top of class from my experience, but I think I'm a little bit biased because it just integrates so well with a lot of platforms I use. So I've enjoyed using it. There's other ones that people can look at though: Marketo, Soapbox, MailChimp, Constant Contact. Some of those I don't care for as much, but again, I try to be pretty platform agnostic. They're out there. They do a lot of the same things. HubSpot's one I really like, but those are the sorts of platforms you can be looking at. And like Matt said, then making the decision, how much of this needs to plug into my development database? Do I need to see click rates at the donor level? And you might say yes. In other cases, you say, well, I want to see click rates and open rates because I'm trying to evaluate the effectiveness of the campaign. And if I need to actually track down a donor and what they've done, I can go and do that. But do I need that all piling into one page on my donor record where I've got this huge, laundry list of stuff? It can become overwhelming. So you want to be judicious with what you're putting into your development database and what you're putting into your donor record, just so you're putting the most useful information there.
So Ivan asks, I recently heard of Flocknote People. In your experience, does this add-on fulfill the needs of a CRM comparable to eTapestry, Kindful, Neon, etc.? Do you know that one?
I do not have experience with Flocknotes People, unfortunately. But I could look into it, and we can always get back to Ivan.
Yeah, you could write Devon an email.
Please do, please do. And I do feel bad whenever people do come like, hey, I've this new database called I was gonna make fun of Nutshell, but that's actually a real database. But people come to me like, this new database called Nutshell, this new CRM called whatever. Like, what do you think of it? I just don't have experience in everything. So unfortunately, I always can't give specific advice toward that.
Well, I want to. We have about 10 more minutes here, I think, and I want to talk about something else that's related to this, and it's a problem that fundraisers have that many nonprofits have this problem, and that is this sort of problem that we call the middle donor, and how to. Devon, you alluded to something earlier where you said that there are databases sometimes broken up or organizations where they have small donors, under a certain level, and then they have major donors and foundations, and that's kind of separate. But many organizations have donors somewhere in the middle. And those donors oftentimes have a great deal of potential. But it's difficult as an organization when you're trying to, everyone's working in a scarce resource environment. And so you're never really sure how much should we invest in this middle tier of donors. And if we do invest, what is our best strategy for moving them up the sort of giving ladder, if you will? And one of the things that Matt and his team does is something called predictive modeling. And that is sort of uses your database, all of your data, and then also information that's available through various research platforms to develop a model for addressing that problem of the middle donors, the ones that they don't get so much attention because they're not really big donors, they're not small donors, so maybe you're not dealing with them quite the same way you use small donor, but they may have a lot of potential. And Matt, I ask you, what is predictive modeling and what problem does it help me solve as a fundraiser?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Our core philosophy at American Philanthropic when it comes to data is that we want to provide data that is useful, that is accessible, and that is correctly interpreted. Those are the three things I focus on. And one of the things that we have found, to elaborate a little bit on the problem you're referring to, is that when we do surveys of development operations in organizations, we collect data on what people are doing, and we collect data on what donors do over time. And we find that even at many otherwise large, successful, well-funded organizations with many thousands of donors, there's this big gap between people who are giving maybe small donations online or through direct mail. And then there's, at some point along the line, someone crosses the line into coming to the attention of a major gifts officer, right? Whether that's $1,000 or $5,000 or maybe even $10,000 at a very large organization. And so when you look at the renewal rates of people who fall somewhere in between those things, someone who's given $100, $500, $1,000, and you look at renewal rates, they're very, very poor. Something like 55% over 2 years of $1,000 donors renew at typical nonprofit organizations. But the lifetime value of that donor base is absolutely massive. And so we have a number of solutions, predictive modeling being one of them, to help address that problem. And we'll actually be talking quite a bit more in depth about this on our masterclass we have coming up on January 13th. It's a Thursday afternoon where we're talking about the lost $500 donor and this whole kind of problem. But predictive modeling specifically, we have data folks on our team who collect all of the data on your donors, everything you might have in your database, donation information, volunteering, events. If you have that, click-through rates and open rates, we'll look at that. And then we can add other information. If you don't have a wealth screen of your database, we can add wealth indicators, luxury and lifestyle habits, all these sorts of bits of data. And then specific to your organization and your development operation, we crunch the numbers to answer a few different key questions. So number one is usually, okay, if my major gifts level is $5,000, then I want to know, of all my folks who are not yet at $5,000, who are the people who are most likely to rise up to that level, right? Because if you have a well-developed major gifts team, it's often like they want hot leads, right? Like they get really frustrated when you give them 100 donors to call who are way below the major gifts level, and they end up getting a meeting with one or two of them. They want people who've been cultivated, who will interact with them, who will accept call requests and meeting requests, because that makes their time that much more efficient. So we do a mathematical scoring of the people below that major gifts level, who is most likely to rise to that level. We can also answer the question of which of your lapse donors are most likely to come back to you, right? If you have thousands and thousands of lapse donors, you might include them all on a mailing every once in a while, but you can be a lot more efficient if you know, here's the 10% of them that are most likely to be responsive to a solicitation to come back on board as a donor. Who's most likely to renew a gift? If you have many known plan gifts, if you have 30, 40, or 50 plan gifts as well, we can build a model around that as well. And I would emphasize the value of this service, you know, is mostly to people with $5,000 donors or more. And it's a matter of prioritization and serving up leads. And so when we go through this exercise, one of the things we find is we can look at individual factors and see whether or not they were predictive, right? So if crossing the $1,000 threshold is not predictive of making a $5,000 gift, that probably means something is broken about your acknowledgement procedures or your donor club benefits at that $1,000 level, because crossing lower thresholds should lead to more potential for higher level gifts. So it helps you think strategically as well about what might be missing in your particular operation in a way that, you know, a static formula would not help us get to.
So that's predictive modeling, and it helps organizations discern who in this middle tier of donors, this big mass of donors that you have, are the ones who are likely to upgrade or most likely to upgrade, the ones who are most likely to give you the next gift. It's a way of sorting out and prioritizing those donors and paying attention to them. And so there's all kinds of strategies then that you can use that we can recommend for mailing to them, and maybe in a different way, doing more personalized things. There's a lot of things that you can do now on a large scale that are, it sounds like a contradiction, but are more personalized to that segment. And so that's actually, to me, it's a really, really wonderful, wonderful thing to be able to predict to some degree, you know, where the value is in that big bulk, and also of donors, and then also your lapsed donors. Matt, you mentioned databases of 5,000 and above donors, but I suspect, and just through consultation, there may be things that if you have 2,000 donors or 3,000 donors, that you might be able to glean just by looking at, maybe not going through the whole predictive modeling process, but looking at your database and thinking about the habits, frequency of giving, longevity of giving, wealth screening, all of those kinds of things. There may be insights that could be gleaned even if you have a smaller file.
Yep, that's right. We do wealth screening. If you haven't done that before, it can be cheaper to do that if you have a smaller donor database through us, rather than signing up for a subscription to one of those tools yourself. We can do data appending. We can find email addresses, for example, for folks that you only.
So just pause on data appending for a second. Data appending is when you do what?
It's when you take donor information that you have and you add other fields of information that you would like to have. So there are, at this point, if you haven't done this or you haven't really thought about it or heard about it, it can be kind of creepy, but there are many, many data companies out there that can sell you, if you have a name and an address, for example, you can purchase an email address matched with that. Or if you have only an email address from a digital campaign you did, we can actually append a name and a mailing address to those at a certain match rate. Or oftentimes people are looking for cell phone numbers, right? Because you have a donor who gives a gift and you want to call them, but they didn't give you a phone number. A lot of that information can actually be added through purchasing this sort of data. So usually,
how many donor, when does it make sense to me? What if I have, 5 donors and I'm going to call Matt, hey Matt, I want to get the cell phone.
depending on your depending on your situation, it could be as few as a few hundred donors. If you have, if you're just starting up in fundraising and you've got a lot of digital donations and you don't have mailing addresses, it's actually really important to start sending mail to them, and we can get you started doing those sorts of things. So that is actually scalable downward to smaller organizations pretty efficiently.
Okay, cool. Well, I wanted to make sure that we talked about that just a little bit at the end here, this idea of predictive modeling. I think it's very useful, especially as you start to grow your house file and you have maybe 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 donors and above. It's a very useful thing, and it's an enormous mistake for organizations to write off their lapsed donors. And there's a lot of value, and people's lives are complicated. Sometimes they stop giving for different reasons that have nothing to do with your organization. And bringing them back into the life of your organization can be a very powerful way to help support your mission. So I really encourage those of you out there that may have questions about both predictive modeling and then data appending and those types of things to reach out to Matt, or any general questions, or to Devon as well if you have questions about data or databases. And Devon doesn't have much of a life. He loves to answer emails and stay up late doing that. So reach out to Devon and give him a call. Yeah, Devon knows a lot about data and nerdy things like that, and is also like a nice man. He's fun to talk to, and he's personable. So he's not just,
I'm almost normal. So
yeah. So it's a wonderful combination. And so then finally, I just want to remind you that if you would like to attend a webinar on data and databases, I think Devon will be hosting a webinar on January 6th. You can sign up for that at AmericanPhilanthropic.com under Forgotten Foundations of Fundraising. And that's a free webinar. It's just a lot more information on data and databases. And then we also have a master class coming up that Matt is leading. And it's a master class on that very problem of the lost $500 donor, and how you go about identifying them and bringing them back into the life of your organization as a meaningful donor. So those are two very useful. That is on January 13th after the new year. And I guess the webinar is on January 6th. So if you're interested in these topics, sign up. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Devon, and thank you, Matt.